Gemini, a dangerous connection is being cut, and it's the best thing that could happen to you. Gemini, have you noticed something off lately? A person who suddenly grew distant. A conversation that ended in silence. An interaction that once sparked joy, but now feels like walking through fog. You may think it's coincidence, but the truth is it's protection. Right now, something is being cut from your life. Not by you, and not out of punishment, but by the divine intelligence that sees what you don't yet understand. And while your mind is searching for explanations, your spirit already knows. This connection was never meant to go where you're headed. You've always trusted your instincts until they started pulling you away from someone familiar. That tension you've been feeling? That sudden wave of exhaustion after speaking to a certain person? That isn't just emotional weariness. It's your nervous system trying to warn you. This isn't paranoia, Gemini. It's a divine recalibration. A silent rescue. You're being redirected. You're being shielded. And soon, what feels like loss will reveal itself as liberation. I'm Elizabeth, your guide at Esoteric Wisdom, where we decode the deeper messages the cosmos whispers through your life. If this message stirs something inside, don't brush it aside. Stay until the end. This may be one of the most important soul insights you receive this year. And if your spirit feels it too, I invite you to like, comment, and subscribe. Now, let's open the veil on what's really happening. Chapter 1. The Hidden Drain, when Gemini's light attracts the wrong shadows. Gemini, you've always been magnetic. Your mind moves fast, your curiosity radiates outward, and your energy? It's electric. But what many don't realize is this. Your light not only attracts truth and brilliance, it can also draw in shadows. Right now, your energy is undergoing a quiet evolution. And in that shift, a silent thread is being cut, a connection that once seemed harmless, even helpful, but was secretly draining your vitality. Not because you were weak, but because you were open. Too open. You see, Mercury, your ruling planet, is currently in intense conversation with Neptune and Pluto. This alignment is peeling away illusions, especially around who you trust, who you let close, and who you give your time, thoughts, and spirit to. Have you felt it lately? That strange tiredness after a conversation that should have lifted you up? The urge to ghost someone without knowing why? The insomnia, the brain fog, the emotional static? Gemini, this isn't random. Your nervous system has picked up on something your mind is only beginning to decode. Let me share a story with you. Lisa, a Gemini nurse from Seattle, had always been the go-to friend. Everyone leaned on her. One woman in particular, let's call her Dana, had been in Lisa's life for years. They laughed, they vented, they texted every day. But something shifted. Lisa started waking up anxious. She'd reread Dana's texts and feel unsettled. She didn't know why until a spiritual mentor asked her, "Do you feel more or less like yourself after you speak to her?" That question unraveled everything. Lisa realized that what she mistook for connection was emotional entanglement. Dana was not malicious, but her presence was heavy, expectant, subtly manipulative. Lisa's aura had been absorbing it for years. And when Dana suddenly stopped calling, at first Lisa panicked. But within a week, her energy returned. She started painting again, sleeping better, laughing for no reason. That silence wasn't punishment. It was divine intervention. You may be facing something similar now. A friend going cold. A colleague who used to be close becoming unavailable. A romantic flame losing spark out of nowhere. And your first instinct, being Gemini, might be to figure it out. To bridge the gap, ask the questions, trace the timeline. But what if the disconnection is the protection? What if trying to repair it is like pulling a vine back into your garden after it's already choked the roots? Energetically, this bond, whatever or whoever it is, was starting to override your intuitive clarity. It may have felt familiar, even comforting, but it was stifling your evolution. Not in loud, toxic ways, but in quiet, parasitic patterns. The signs are subtle. A phrase that lingers in your mind. A decision you second-guess only after talking to them. An inner knowing that shrinks every time you share it. Gemini, you are ruled by Mercury. Words are your frequency. So when your words start losing power in certain spaces, that's not a coincidence. That's energetic interference. And here's the truth. This connection is not being cut by you. It's being cut for you. You didn't fail to maintain it. You didn't mess up. You didn't overthink it, as others may have said. No, this bond outgrew your frequency. Or rather, your frequency outgrew it. And just like the cosmos doesn't ask permission before it spins the planets, the divine doesn't always wait for your conscious decision to protect you. Sometimes it just moves. The question isn't, why is this happening to me? It's, can you trust that something better is being cleared for? Because that's what's coming next. Chapter 2. The Sacred Severance. When the universe ends what Gemini won't. Gemini, let's be honest. You've stayed too long before. Not because you're blind, but because you hope. You always see the potential, the angle, the second chance. And when people show you fragments of who they could be, you stitch them together into a version you can love. But this time, the universe has stopped waiting for you to see clearly. This is a sacred severance. Not a punishment, not a test, but a cosmic intervention because something or someone was slowly dimming the parts of you that are meant to shine the brightest. This bond, this connection, maybe it felt romantic. Maybe it was cloaked in loyalty, obligation, or shared history. But beneath it all, it was holding you back in ways you couldn't fully articulate. Until now, Gemini, Mercury is illuminating a truth you were too gracious to name. Not everyone who smiles at you wishes you well, and not everyone who stands beside you wants you to rise. You've likely already felt the pull of distance, a cooling, a shift, the conversation that suddenly doesn't land, the person who begins to act evasive, short, or strangely absent. You've wondered if it's your fault. It's not. You've tried to decode their silence. You won't. You've played through a dozen scenarios in your head, trying to fix something that was never truly aligned to begin with. Because this isn't about blame. It's about vibration. And when your energy begins to ascend, the things tethered to a lower frequency start to fall away. Not because you are unloving, but because you are finally aligned. This is what's called a divine cut in esoteric astrology. And for you, Gemini, it's being activated by a rare Mercury-Pluto-Uranus configuration, a celestial storm designed to break bonds that block soul evolution. So no, this isn't an accident. That silence you're feeling? It's strategy. That ending that seemed to come out of nowhere? It was written in your stars. Let's talk about Tony, a Gemini entrepreneur from Denver. For years, he partnered with a friend who felt more like a brother. They built a business, shared dreams, even vacationed together. But over time, Tony began feeling small in his own vision. His ideas were dismissed. His light dimmed. And when a major investor showed interest in Tony's independent idea, his friend shut it down behind closed doors. Tony didn't walk away. The universe pushed him. The partnership dissolved unexpectedly after a clerical error revealed hidden financial sabotage. Tony was devastated until he realized how much energy he had been wasting trying to be liked, trying to be fair, trying to be the bigger person. Now, Tony runs a thriving mission-led company, and the clarity that came after the cut was something he could never have seen from within it. Gemini, you might be in that fog right now. And yes, it's disorienting. When Mercury is clearing karmic debris, it can feel like walking through smoke. Everything familiar starts to look different. But trust this, the truth is not in the story you've been telling yourself. It's in how you feel when you leave certain conversations. It's in how you shrink before you speak your truth. It's in the weight that lifts when someone stops calling. You're not just losing a connection. You're regaining yourself. Here's what happens next. The universe will begin to confirm this release through synchronicities, a message you randomly hear, a memory that replays louder than usual, a missed call you don't feel like returning. These aren't random. They're confirmations. And the more you honor this separation, the more space you'll create for a different kind of bond, one that sees all of you and never asks you to fragment to be loved. The only thing the universe asks of you now is this. Don't chase what's being removed. Bless it and release it. Because what's coming next will require your full energy, not the version of you that compromised to be accepted, but the one who now walks in alignment, unedited, unafraid. And yes, it will still sting sometimes. But pain is not the enemy here. It's the door opening. Chapter 3. The Arrival of Resonance. What enters when Gemini finally lets go? Gemini, for every door the universe closes, another one opens, but not always immediately. Sometimes, what comes first is the quiet. That space you're feeling right now? The silence after the storm, the absence where a voice used to be, the eerie peace that feels foreign. It's not emptiness. It's readiness. You've just passed through a spiritual firewall. A bond that once intertwined itself with your thoughts, decisions, and even your nervous system has been dissolved. And in that release, something else is being summoned, something not chaotic, not confusing, not draining, but resonant. You see, Mercury isn't just the planet of communication. In this season of your life, it's functioning as a divine filter. And now that the static is cleared, you're starting to hear differently. You're noticing who makes your soul feel expansive, not just entertained. Who listens when you speak, not just waits for their turn. Who leaves you feeling seen, not just stimulated. Let me tell you about Patrice, a Gemini artist in her 40s from Oakland. After years of trying to force a collaboration with someone she idolized, a poet who got her, or so she thought, Patrice hit a wall. The energy was always off. Deadlines were missed. Conversations were one-sided. And yet Patrice held on. Until one day, the poet ghosted her after a grand award. For weeks, Patrice spiraled, questioned her worth, raged in silence. Then, out of nowhere, a former student of hers reached out. I started a zine, and I thought of you. One conversation turned into a project. That project turned into a community. And now, Patrice doesn't just create, she curates. What felt like a betrayal was actually the path to her platform. Gemini, you are stepping into a similar window. A new connection, or series of them, is forming. But here's the key. They won't arrive through drama. They won't require proving. They'll come in quietly, through alignment. This is how you'll recognize them. Your energy will lift instead of tighten. You'll laugh without analyzing the punchline. You'll speak your truth without pre-editing it in your head. And most of all, you'll stop leaving conversations with that haunting question, did I just betray myself? These new bonds will have clarity. They won't ask you to perform intelligence or mask your mood. They'll recognize both sides of you, your fire and your fog, and still feel safe. Because the version of you they're meeting is no longer diluted by fear. Your energy is recalibrating, and with it, so is your relational field. Even old connections may reappear, this time different, refined, evolved. Some may reach out with new intentions. Others may be replaced entirely. But none of them will carry the code of depletion you've just escaped. And here's something else. Your creativity is about to surge. When Gemini sheds emotional weight, the mental space that opens is vast. Expect a flood of ideas, invitations, and intuitive hits in the coming weeks. Don't chase them, channel them. Journal, create, speak, build. Your voice is a vessel now, not just a tool. But remember, resonance isn't always loud. Sometimes it walks in quietly. You'll need to trust your body now, not just your brain. If your shoulders drop, that's a yes. If your breath deepens, that's alignment. If your laughter feels unguarded, that's home. So many people in your past liked the you that adapted. But the people who are coming, they'll love the you that integrated. You're not half of anything, Gemini. You are both and all. And the connections you're about to form, they won't split you. They'll center you. Chapter 4. The Timed Break. Why this had to happen now. Gemini, have you noticed how everything in your life lately seems to be happening faster, yet also feels more significant? It's not just your imagination. The timing of this divine severance isn't arbitrary. It's astrologically precise. Right now, Mercury, your ruling planet, is forming a rare angular pattern with Saturn and Chiron. One governs sacred structure, the other governs soul wounds. Together, they're pulling you into a corridor of karmic clarity. And through that corridor, only truth can pass. This isn't about random change. It's graduation. You see, Gemini, you've reached a point in your evolution where the old you can no longer survive in the new energy. That sounds poetic, but in practice, it means disruption,
Detachment.
disorientation, and it often shows up as a separation you didn't ask for, but desperately needed. Let's talk plainly. You would have stayed, wouldn't you? Not because you're weak, but because you care. You see nuance. You hear what people don't say. You remember the good times, and your mind fills in the rest. That's the gift and the burden of Mercury in your soul. But the universe sees what you cannot. That person, that place, that mindset was tied to an older version of your vibration. And as you began to shift, your higher self started sending out signals, subtle at first, then louder still, until the bond had to break. It's not just about removing someone toxic. It's about ending a cycle. The end of giving too much, over-explaining, holding both sides of the conversation. The cycle of being the understood, one so that others don't feel threatened. Gemini, this is your spiritual timestamp. You have officially outgrown the energetic contract that held that connection together. Let me share one final story. Samantha, a Gemini therapist in her late 50s from New Mexico, had been in a marriage for over 20 years.
Safe.
Familiar, but quietly hollow. They still had dinner, exchanged kind words, kept up appearances. Yet she felt invisible. Then, without warning, her husband announced a work move. He'd be gone for 6 months. "We'll make it work," he said. But something in Samantha shifted. In the quiet of that absence, she didn't just miss him. She met herself. And by the time he returned, the woman he'd left behind had become someone else entirely.
They didn't argue.
They just ended.
Now,
Samantha runs grief circles for women going through silent separations. The kind that don't scream or shatter, but liberate. Gemini, this is what's happening to you. A quiet revolution. A time departure. The old tether is being removed, not because it failed, but because it fulfilled its purpose.
and you?
You're no longer the person who needed it. Here's what's next. You will feel a strange peace. That's not denial, it's detachment. You'll have moments of missing them. That's memory, not misdirection. You'll be tempted to reconnect, but ask, do I want them or the version of me I was with them? Because the truth is this, the version of you who allowed that connection no longer exists. And if you try to go back, you'll have to shrink again. But if you honor this moment, if you choose to trust the cut, what awaits is not just freedom, it's sovereignty. Gemini, you are crossing into a timeline where your clarity is your currency, where your presence is your protection, where you no longer bond through performance, but through pure resonance. This had to happen now because you're ready. The divine doesn't rush, and it never cuts what still serves you. The only question left is, will you keep mourning the exit, or will you start preparing for the entrance? The silence was the sign all along. Gemini, you've now walked through every layer of this separation, from confusion to clarity, from release to realignment. And you've realized something essential. What left your life wasn't your loss, it was your liberation. You didn't lose a connection. You reclaimed your center. The universe didn't just cut something away. It cleared the static so you could finally hear yourself again. This experience has reshaped your entire energetic blueprint. You are no longer the Gemini who bends to be accepted, who dims their brilliance to avoid being too much, who explains their sensitivity away just to keep the peace. That version of you was beautiful, but she's been retired. In her place, a version who is whole. Because now you know, if a connection makes you doubt your truth, it's not love. If presence feels like pressure, it's not peace. And if silence brings relief, it's not a loss, it's a blessing. So take a breath, take another, feel the weight that is no longer yours, and ask yourself this, what am I ready to receive now that I've stopped carrying what wasn't mine? Gemini, your transformation isn't loud, it's sovereign. It doesn't demand attention, it commands alignment. The people who remain, who rise with you into this new frequency, they won't need explanations. They'll understand your silence. They'll respect your truth. And they'll meet you not in your performance, but in your presence. You've stepped into a new chapter, one where you no longer explain your worth.
You embody it.
And that is how you know you are free. If this message spoke to your soul, I invite you to like this video, comment with the truth you're claiming, and subscribe to Esoteric Wisdom so you never miss the sacred timing meant just for you. This journey isn't over. It's just beginning. And your voice, your clarity, your presence, they were never too much. They were always the message.